Have you ever stood so close to hatred that it nearly destroyed you? This is the story of a man who carried bitterness for decades, until one moment, at the foot of a cross, changed everything forever. His life was shattered by betrayal, but what he witnessed that day didn't just alter his heart, it resurrected it. Stay with us to hear this incredible journey of pain, forgiveness, and redemption, a story that could easily be yours, or someone you know. The sun was merciless that day, pressing down on Ephraim's shoulders as he trudged along the narrow road outside Jerusalem. His tunic clung to his back, soaked in sweat, but he didn't care. Inside, the heat of bitterness burned hotter. For years, he had carried the weight of his brother's betrayal, a debt never repaid, a family torn apart. He had vowed to never forgive, and the vow had become part of him, like the calluses on his hands or the lines on his weathered face. He had heard the rabbi from Nazareth was nearby, but Ephraim scoffed at the news. Words of mercy and forgiveness? They were for fools. He knew the world was built on justice, on repayment, on strength. His father had died heartbroken, and his mother wept every night while his brother squandered the inheritance in a distant city. Ephraim bore the burden alone, tending the fields that should have been shared, laboring for years with no help, no apology, no restitution. That morning, Ephraim had gone to the market to trade olives, but a chance word overheard changed his plans. The teacher is at Golgotha. A strange place for a teacher, he thought, but curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, pulled him toward the place of execution. He followed the trail of dusty footprints, past weeping women and silent watchers, until the place came into view. 3 crosses, 3 men, and a crowd restless with anticipation and dread. Ephraim stood at the edge, arms crossed, trying to suppress the sudden tightness in his chest. The central figure, bloodied and broken, bore a sign above his head: King of the Jews. He had heard of this man. Yeshua, the healer, the one who spoke of loving enemies and turning the other cheek. Ephraim's jaw clenched at the absurdity of it all. Look where love and forgiveness had brought this man. Nailed to wood, mocked, abandoned. A group nearby sneered, "If you are the Son of God, save yourself!" Ephraim didn't join in. He was no longer sure what he believed. His eyes drifted to the criminals on either side of Yeshua. One cursed, spitting defiance even with his last breaths. But the other? Ephraim leaned in, straining to hear. The man, through gasps of pain, pleaded, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." The words hit Ephraim harder than he expected. Why would this dying criminal ask such a thing? And even more confounding, Yeshua's response, calm, assured, despite the agony. "Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." Ephraim swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. Paradise? For him? For a criminal? The world he understood, the world of debts repaid and wrongs punished, cracked in that moment. Ephraim's heart pounded, but he didn't know why. The sky above darkened unnaturally, as if the very earth mourned. Around him, some cried out in fear, others mocked more loudly, trying to silence their own unease. Ephraim could not move. His feet felt rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on Yeshua as he struggled for breath. Then, with a voice that somehow carried above the din, Yeshua cried out, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Forgive them? Ephraim recoiled. Forgive the ones who had driven the nails, who spat and laughed. Forgive the ones who had abandoned him? It made no sense. Forgiveness, in Ephraim's world, was not given. It was earned. And yet the words lingered in the heavy air, undeniable and alive, as though they themselves had power. The earth trembled suddenly beneath Ephraim's feet, sending some in the crowd running in terror. The centurion standing nearby stared up at the cross with wide eyes, whispering, "Surely this man was the Son of God." Ephraim remained, unable to look away. Something inside him, something old, hardened, and cold, was beginning to crack. As the dust settled and the crowd began to disperse, Ephraim stood alone, longer than most. The body on the cross was lifeless now, but the words he had spoken were very much alive within Ephraim. He thought of his brother, of the years stolen by hatred. He had clung to bitterness as though it protected him, but now he wasn't sure it had ever done anything but imprison him. Ephraim finally turned to go, but his steps faltered. In the distance, he saw a woman collapsed in the arms of another disciple, sobbing uncontrollably. He recognized her face from stories, Mary, the mother of Yeshua. The sight pierced him deeply. She had lost everything, yet there was no bitterness in her grief, only love and sorrow. How was that possible? That night, Ephraim could not sleep. He lay on his mat, staring at the ceiling, the words replaying over and over. Father, forgive them. He thought of his brother's face, a face he had not seen in years but could still picture perfectly. The mischievous grin, the eyes that used to light up before greed took hold. Ephraim's chest ached in a way he couldn't explain. The next morning, Ephraim rose before the sun, as he always did, but instead of heading to the fields, he found himself walking toward the outskirts of the city. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe the tomb they had spoken of, maybe someone who had known the teacher. All he knew was that he couldn't go back to life as it had been before. Along the way, he passed merchants setting up stalls, Roman soldiers still on edge after the strange events of the previous day, and groups of mourners sharing whispered stories. Some said Yeshua's body had been buried by a rich man in a garden tomb. Others said his followers were hiding, afraid. Ephraim felt the same gnawing fear, but it wasn't for his safety. It was fear of what this meant for his life. He found the tomb easily, not far from the place of the execution. The stone was still there, sealing the entrance. He sat on a nearby rock, staring at it, feeling foolish for coming, but unable to leave. Time passed. The sun climbed higher. Eventually, he noticed a man placing flowers near the tomb and offered him a quiet greeting. They exchanged a few words, but the man said something that stayed with Ephraim. He taught us to forgive, even our worst enemies. I saw him do it, even as they killed him. The man walked away, leaving Ephraim alone with those words echoing again, confirming what he had witnessed with his own eyes. Ephraim closed his eyes and took a shaky breath. The tight grip of resentment that had ruled his life for so long loosened just a little. He realized, painfully, that all these years he had believed he was protecting himself by refusing to forgive. But in truth, he had only been hurting himself, isolating himself from love, from peace, from life. He stood, brushing the dust from his clothes, and looked at the tomb one last time. Then, without fully knowing why, he began walking in the opposite direction, towards the road that led north, towards the village where his brother was said to be living these days. Every step felt uncertain, heavy with fear and hope intermingled. The journey took days, longer than he had expected. Along the way, he slept under the stars, ate little, and thought much. He remembered their childhood, running through the fields, stealing figs from the neighbor's orchard, laughing until their sides hurt. He wondered when everything had changed, when his brother had grown selfish, when he himself had grown so hard. When he finally reached the village, he asked around cautiously, unsure if his brother was even still there. An old woman at the well nodded and pointed to a small house near the edge of town. Ephraim's heart pounded as he approached, every step an act of courage, every breath a prayer. He didn't know he knew how to pray. He stopped at the doorway, staring at the worn wooden frame. Inside, he heard voices, children laughing, a woman humming. Then, a man's voice, deep and familiar, calling out, "Dinner's ready!" Ephraim's eyes stung with unexpected tears. He stood there, frozen, his hand hovering near the door, but unable to knock. Just then, the door creaked open, and there stood his brother, older, his face lined with the same years of labor and loss. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then his brother's eyes widened in shock and recognition. "Ephraim," he whispered, as if saying the name summoned something long buried. Ephraim swallowed hard, his mouth dry. He had rehearsed 1,000 angry words over the years, but now none came. Instead, he simply said, It's been a long time." His brother stepped outside, closing the door behind him, as though sensing this conversation needed to happen away from the eyes of his new family. They stood in silence for what felt like hours, neither knowing how to begin. Finally, his brother said, I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again." His voice cracked, and for the first time, Ephraim saw not the betrayer of his youth, but a man who carried his own burden of regret. Ephraim exhaled slowly, the words of Yeshua echoing again in his mind. "Father, forgive them." He looked at his brother, really looked, and realized that holding onto his hatred wouldn't undo the past, wouldn't heal the wounds. Only mercy could do that. "I didn't, but now I do," he said quietly. His brother's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered, as though those words had been waiting for years to be set free. Ephraim felt his own tears welling up, surprising him with their intensity. For the first time, he allowed himself to feel the weight of all he had lost, and then to let it go. They embraced, awkwardly at first, then fully, brothers once again. Ephraim felt the years of silence, of bitterness, of loneliness begin to melt away in the warmth of that simple human touch. He realized that this was the true miracle. Not a life spared from death, but a heart spared from hatred. Later, they sat together outside the house, watching the children play in the fading light. Ephraim learned that his brother had returned home years ago, ashamed and broken, and had built a new life, always hoping for a chance to make amends, but never believing it would come. Ephraim shared about the teacher, about the words spoken from the cross that had changed everything for him. His brother listened, tears streaking his dusty cheeks, as Ephraim described the moment when he realized that forgiveness wasn't weakness, but the strongest thing a man could offer. As night fell, Ephraim realized he had no desire to return to the life he had left behind. Something had shifted permanently in him. The fields he had once tended alone would now be shared, not just in labor, but in love, in fellowship, in a new understanding of what it meant to live free. The next morning, Ephraim helped his brother repair a section of the fence around the house. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind of silence only shared by those who have been through pain and come out the other side together. Ephraim noticed how the bitterness that had once filled him now felt distant, like a bad dream barely remembered. At midday, as they sat under the olive tree, sharing bread and olives, Ephraim thought about how close he had come to living the rest of his life, imprisoned by resentment. He silently thanked the teacher, not just for the words spoken from the cross, but for the courage they had inspired in him. In the following days, Ephraim stayed with his brother's family, getting to know his nephews and nieces, helping with the chores, and slowly rebuilding what had been broken. He realized that forgiveness was not a single act, but a daily choice, one that brought healing little by little, like rain softening hard soil. Sometimes, when alone, Ephraim would remember the sight of the cross, the man who had spoken mercy in the face of cruelty. It remained vivid, a guiding light whenever old anger tried to creep back in. He understood now why so many had followed Yeshua. Not because he promised an easy life, but because he showed a better way to live. Word eventually reached them that some of Yeshua's followers were claiming he had risen from the dead. Ephraim wasn't sure what to make of it, but strangely, he found that he didn't need proof. He already knew that something in him that had once been dead was now very much alive. Days turned into weeks, and Ephraim found himself laughing more freely, sleeping more peacefully, and waking up with a sense of purpose he hadn't known in years. His brother noticed it too, sometimes watching him quietly with a grateful smile. They didn't speak much about the past anymore. It was enough that they were living in a new present. One evening, as they sat around the fire with the children gathered close, Ephraim told them stories from their own childhood, tales of adventure and mischief. His brother joined in, adding details Ephraim had forgotten. The children's laughter filled the house, and Ephraim realized that he wasn't just reconnecting with his brother, he was becoming part of a family again. Sometimes, late at night, Ephraim would walk alone outside the village, looking up at the stars. He thought of the cross, of the criminal who had dared to ask for mercy, and received paradise in return. He thought of Yeshua's words, not spoken to him directly, but now etched into his life more deeply than anything anyone had ever told him. There were moments when doubt crept in. Could his forgiveness really erase the years of pain? But then he would remember the look in his brother's eyes when they first embraced, the trembling relief, the silent gratitude. That look reminded him that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about refusing to let it control the future. One morning, as they worked side by side repairing a neighbor's roof, his brother paused and said quietly, "I never thought you'd come. I thought I'd lost you forever." Ephraim smiled, gripping his brother's shoulder. "I thought I had lost myself." They didn't need to say more. The silence between them was filled with understanding. The villagers soon grew accustomed to seeing the two brothers together, and many marveled at their reconciliation. Some even asked Ephraim what had changed, and he would tell them, simply and without embellishment, about the day he stood at the foot of a cross and heard a man forgive those who were killing him. Over time, Ephraim began visiting nearby towns, working as a tradesman and sharing his story whenever he was asked. He didn't consider himself a preacher, just a man who had been trapped in bitterness and had found freedom through mercy. And that, he realized, was a story many needed to hear. One afternoon, while repairing a cart in a distant village, he overheard a group debating whether Yeshua had truly risen. Some mocked, others defended the claim with passion. Ephraim didn't join the argument. Instead, he thought quietly to himself, "Whether he rose or not, he already raised me from the dead." He would often return to his brother's home, helping with the harvest, sharing meals, and celebrating festivals together. Each return was a reminder of how far he had come. From a man consumed by hatred and isolation, to a man surrounded by love, connection, and peace. Years later, Ephraim returned once more to Jerusalem during the festival. He walked the old roads, past familiar landmarks, until he found himself at Golgotha. The crosses were gone, but the hill remained, silent and empty. He stood there for a long time, letting the wind whip around him, remembering. He didn't need to see the wood or the nails to feel the weight of what had happened there. That place had marked the death of one man, but also the death of Ephraim's bitterness. It had also marked the beginning of something new. A life built not on justice alone, but on mercy, love, and forgiveness. As he turned to leave, he noticed a group gathered nearby, listening to a man reading from a scroll about the teacher's life and teachings. Ephraim smiled, knowing that the story continued to spread, changing lives just as it had changed his own. He didn't need to speak. His life now was its own testimony. Back in his village, Ephraim grew old, surrounded by his brother's children and grandchildren, who all called him uncle with affection and respect. On quiet evenings, he would sit by the fire, watching them play, and reflect on the strange, beautiful path that had brought him here. Sometimes they asked him to tell the story of how he and their father had reconciled after years of estrangement. He always began the same way. "It all started when I stood at the foot of a cross, and a dying man taught me how to live." And as he told the story, he never left out the most important part, that forgiveness is a choice, sometimes the hardest choice of all, but always the most freeing. His life became a quiet, steady witness to the truth that mercy has the power not just to mend relationships, but to resurrect broken hearts. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share more powerful, true-to-life stories inspired by biblical events, each one reminding us of the strength of faith, forgiveness, and transformation. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next one. Thank you for watching, and remember, no matter how broken your story is, it's never too late for a new beginning.